You know, there are some teachers that are great teachers, that are great educators, that inspire you to be the very best that you can, to work hard, to be creative, to use your imagination and create works that entertain or amaze or enthrall an audience or an observer or a reader, depending on the type of art which you're creating. In this particular discussion, the art in question is writing. And I have a gripe that is 44 years too late, but better late than never. Now, this is a bitch about a teacher I had back in 5th grade. That being an elementary school teacher, and his name was Mr. Enterline. Now, Mr. Enterline, he was a younger teacher. He might have been about 28 or 30 years old. I remember he was thin and lanky and a little goofy looking. And back in the 70s, mustaches were in. They were okay fashion for men to have mustaches. So he had a thick mustache, and he was kind of goofy. And he had a good sense of humor. I liked his sense of humor. But he did 3 things that I can remember that were just dumb, just stupid for a teacher to do. One time I had I forget what point he was making, but anyway, he was making some kind of a point, and I asked the question, and he answered whatever, and I said, "Oh well, I thought that things go this way or that way," whatever the topic might have been. And he goes, "Well, that was the problem, you thought." Now, the last thing a teacher should be doing is teaching a kid not to think for themselves. And that's a big problem with people nowadays. They don't know how the fuck to think for themselves. And the last thing a teacher should be doing is telling a student not to think on their own and just accept whatever the hell they're being told. And that's the way it came off. Yeah, that was your problem, you thought. Fuck you, Enterline. Second thing that he did, one day during recess, so this is 5th grade again, I guess I was about 11 years old, and my colleagues 11 years old as well. There was one kid named Todd during recess, and I might have insulted him a little bit. A minor insult, which kids do. They just do it, and that just is what they do, and then they do it and they move on. Well, this kid punched me. Well, being the little dweeb I was, I went and told the teacher. I went and told Mr. Enterline about it. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Report criminal acts to authorities. So I went to Mr. Enterline and I reported Todd for assaulting me. I mean, it hurt, but I was not injured. So, but anyway, it was technically an assault. And Enterline goes, what went on? So I told him, I said, I did this minor insult, and then he whacked me. And Enterline's like, well, I would have done that too if you'd have said that to me. Like, fuck you, man. He's a fucking teacher. He's supposed to be defending victims, especially victims of physical assault. And he's here saying, like, well, you deserved it. Like, basically, fuck you, kid, you deserved it. And then just walked away. And it made me feeling very victimized and as if there was nowhere to go for help. I thank you, Enterline, because you're a fucking asshole. So the third thing he did, and this is really the topic of this discussion, so I should get down to it. He had this assignment. If I remember correctly, then I guess he must have been an English teacher. So he had this assignment to write a real short story, and just a scene, just to write a scene, like a page, like an excerpt out of a story would be. just a page of any kind of a scene. And so I wrote this. I wrote this scene of a like a horror. It would be the horror genre. So there were these two kids who took a dare to go in and sleep overnight in a mausoleum. I don't know how they got in. Sleep in a mausoleum in a cemetery. And in the middle of the night, they hear a creaking and hear there was a sarcophagus in the center of this mausoleum. And slowly the lid, the concrete lid of the sarcophagus starts to move. It starts sliding with this grinding noise. And slowly the corpse rises up out of it, its eyes glaring at the two children as it pulls itself up out of the grave. And the children are screaming and freaking out and trying to claw their way back out of the door, which was closed and locked as per agreement to the dare. And the creature steps out of the sarcophagus and ambles towards them, getting closer and closer. Well, Enterline didn't like that. Enterline said, "Oh, you don't know how to write horror. You don't know how to write scary things. It would be scarier if it was a big shock, and if the corpse just jumped out of the sarcophagus and blam, screamed and leapt out and rushed at the kids. That's how you write horror." So the way I wrote it had a lot of suspense, a lot of tension. And you don't have suspense and tension when something just jump scares you. And now a jump scare is just a cheap scare anyway. It happens in a second and it just plays upon your surprise instincts. It's just a surprise. Oh, surprise! It wasn't that scary. That lasted for a second. When you have something suspenseful, something that's slower and takes more time, it builds the suspense and it builds the fright and the horror. It gives you time for horror to mount. It gets greater and greater, and it lasts for a lot longer than a damn jump scare. So, just, again, fuck you, Enterline. This fucking teacher is giving me the stupid advice when I had it right to begin with, and this dumb fuck was telling me how to do a certain thing in writing the wrong way, which made it a lot worse. It was just horrible fucking advice, and it probably put my writing career back 10 years because I didn't. He made me feel like a fucking schmuck, and I didn't. If he had supported me and said like, yeah, what you did was right, and I know goddamn well I'm right. I'm not just like blowing smoke up my own damn ass here. I'm not just bragging about myself. But I had it right the first time, and if he would have just supported that, maybe I would have started writing earlier. So, fuck you, Enter. Like, fuck bad teachers. Fuck y'all. So anyway, I got an example here of a scene very, very much along the same lines which I've written a few months ago. Let's see here. Okay, I'm reading to you from the Shadow of Helheim. At about 2 a.m, Henriksen's dog's ears prickled, his head popped up, and he began a low, throaty growling. It was not a strong, steady growl of assertion, but a quivering one of fear and apprehension. The dog was staring directly at the mill. Alerted by the dog, Riles promptly stood up, grabbing his stick as he did so. He looked toward the mill, 30 feet away, and there in the broken doorway stood a figure, tall and dark and motionless. Riles could not tell if the figure was looking at them, but it was certainly facing the fire, watching the dancing flames. "Belford, wake up," Riles said in a harsh whisper, hoping not to agitate the dark being immediately. Belford showed no reaction, but lay there snoring lightly. "Wake up," Riles hissed again. Then, when there was still no reaction, Riles kicked Belford hard in the rear and shouted, "Wake up, man!" At that exclamation, the dark figure began to move, walking slowly out of the doorway and towards them, And simultaneously, Balford woke with a start, taking a moment to realize where he was and the situation he was in, then grabbed his stick off the ground and stood up quickly. "What is it?" Balford said. "Shh!" Riles hushed him while pointing at the approaching figure. "Good Lord," Balford said in a thin rush of breath. "Stay close to the fire," Riles said, "and keep your stick at the ready and in both hands." They stood side by side with the fire just behind them, gripping their sticks tightly in their hands. As the figure drew nearer, its features grew apparent in the light of the fire. It was a man, or the ghastly semblance of one. It stood well over 6 feet tall, its shoulders broad, its arms and legs thick. It wore no clothes. Its bare skin was black as ash and was not skin at all. The man's flesh was rough and lumpy and packed solid like a workman's muscles, but it was not muscle or flesh. He seemed to be composed of earth, of ground and soil and stone meshed together, as if by the hands of a large and wicked sculptor. His head was of the same soil and rock composition, with long white hair that hung from his scalp like the trellis of vines. His face was mottled with mud and rock, and yet formed the unmistakable visage of the Nordic line, while the hollow sockets below his brow held no eyes, but reflected the firelight with a red glow. He held in his right hand an axe, long and terrible, with a black handle and a black blade. "Spogelsi!" said Riles. "It is the cutter!" Balford cried out. All right. So if I would have followed Enterline's advice on writing that scene, the Spogelsi creature would have just jumped out of the mill, ran at the men, and leapt on them and knocked them down and assaulted them. All taking place in a matter of a couple of seconds. Here, with the appearance of the dark man, he's just standing there a little bit, allowing the tension to rise. And then after Riles wakes Balford with that kind of louder noise, then it draws the Spogelsi closer, and he walks slowly with the tension building, the threat building, and the suspense growing, and then letting the horror build up in the reader. And none of this would have been possible if I'd followed that damn Mr. Enterline's advice. I just want to say, like, fuck you, Enterline. And that's pretty much makes my point. So that's my thought for the day. You have a good evening.